She never asked for their help. But what her children discovered would change everything they thought they knew about love. The sound of the kettle was the only noise in the small kitchen that morning. Ruth adjusted the flame on her gas stove and smiled faintly as steam rose, curling through a shaft of sunlight that slipped between faded lace curtains. Her slippers whispered softly on the tiled floor as she set out 1 cup, 1 spoon, 1 small saucer of sugar. A routine she'd perfected for years. Simple, steady, dignified. She had never needed much. The quiet suited her. But sometimes, when the clock ticked too loudly, Ruth wondered when silence had become her most constant companion. Hey there, my dear family and friends. If you're already tuned in and ready to enjoy this story, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story just as captivating, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. On the small dining table lay a neatly stacked pile of envelopes, bills, letters, and 1 crisp white envelope stamped with her bank's logo. She touched it but didn't open it. Later, she murmured, as if saying it aloud would make the numbers inside less real. Outside, the world hummed with life. Somewhere, far away in the city, her children were rushing through another ordinary day. Evan adjusted his tie in the elevator's mirrored wall, trying to flatten the exhaustion under his eyes. His phone buzzed, his sister Clara. "Hey, big shot," her voice teased. "Did you call Mom this week?" He sighed. "I texted her." "That's not calling." "I'm drowning in meetings, Clara." She hesitated. "She's fine, right?" Evan looked away from his reflection. "She's always fine." Their conversation ended there, like most of their calls, full of half-care, half-excuses. In the back of his mind, he pictured his mother's house exactly as it had always been. Quiet, tidy, unchanged. He assumed she liked it that way. Clara, meanwhile, was trying to wrestle her toddler into a car seat. Crayons rolled across the driveway. "Mom, I'm gonna be late again," her little boy cried. She laughed, though her patience thinned. "You can't be late for preschool, sweetheart." Once he was buckled in, she sat behind the wheel, glancing at her phone. There was a message from Ruth. "Good morning, my love. How's my little artist today?" Clara smiled, typing back quickly. "He's a tornado, as usual. Love you, Mom." She hesitated a moment before hitting send, guilt pressing faintly at her chest. She hadn't visited in weeks, maybe months. Back in her kitchen, Ruth folded the bank envelope and tucked it into a drawer beside old recipes and faded photographs. She didn't need to look inside to know what it said. She knew every cent in that account by heart. Her pension covered the basics, just barely. Groceries, electricity, the occasional doctor's visit. She managed because she always had. Asking her children for help had never crossed her mind. They had their own families now. Their own storms to weather. She poured her tea, stirring slowly, watching the liquid swirl into a perfect amber hue. It reminded her of something she used to tell them when they were young. Life only gets bitter when you stop stirring it yourself. Still, a thought lingered. How strange it was to raise 2 children, love them so deeply, and end up alone most days. Pride had its price, she supposed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the neighbors' rooftops, Ruth's phone buzzed. It was Clara again. "Mom, we were thinking, maybe we should all have dinner this weekend. You, me, Evan, the kids." Ruth brightened instantly. "Oh, that would be lovely." Clara hesitated. "You don't have to cook, okay? We'll bring something." "Nonsense," Ruth said with a small laugh. "You know I enjoy it." After the call, she sat in the quiet, smiling at the thought. A family dinner, it had been too long. Maybe they'd finally sit, talk, and laugh like old times. She reached for her checkbook to plan for groceries. Her pen hovered above the page when she noticed the number written at the bottom of her balance column. It wasn't much. But she calculated anyway, whispering to herself, "I can stretch it. I always do." Have you ever known someone too proud to ask for help, even from those who love them most? Why do you think pride and love often collide? Share your thoughts below in the comments. Your stories matter. The next day, the world moved in fast motion for everyone but her. Evan signed contracts, shook hands, and tried not to think about the hollowness behind his success. Clara folded laundry between video calls, pretending she could do it all. And Ruth, she baked a pie. Not because she had the ingredients to spare, but because her children loved it. That night, she sat on her porch with a small cup of tea and looked at the stars. They had watched her raise a family, bury her husband, and survive storms that no one had seen. She whispered softly, "They turned out well, didn't they, John?" As if her late husband could hear her through the night air. In the glow of the porch light, her reflection in the window looked smaller, older, but still strong. "I'm fine," she told herself again. "They don't need to worry." Somewhere in the city, Clara scrolled through family photos and paused on one. Her mother standing proudly at her graduation, her smile wider than anyone else's. Evan called moments later. "You're still thinking about Mom, aren't you?" he asked. Clara smiled faintly. "Always. Dinner this weekend then." "Saturday." "Yeah. Maybe we should surprise her with something nice." "Like what?" "I don't know," Clara said softly. "Maybe just showing up." Saturday morning arrived. The smell of baked chicken and herbs filled Ruth's kitchen as sunlight spilled over her counter. She hummed while setting the table. 3 plates, polished silverware, fresh flowers in a jar. Every detail was her love made visible. She didn't hear the mail slip through the door. A new envelope slid across the floor, landing by her feet. The same familiar bank logo stared back at her. She picked it up, sighed, and placed it on the counter without opening it. "Later," she whispered again. Her children would be here soon. There would be laughter, stories, maybe even tears. She didn't know that tonight, those few printed numbers inside that envelope would change everything. Ruth's kitchen was alive with warmth that Saturday evening. The smell of roasted chicken mingled with thyme and butter. Soft jazz played from an old radio by the window. She glanced around the room. Tablecloth ironed, plates aligned, candles flickering. It looked perfect. Felt perfect. When the doorbell rang, her heart jumped with the same rush she used to feel when her children were small and running home from school. "Mom," Clara said, stepping inside with a burst of laughter and the chaos of her toddler clinging to her hip. Evan followed, tall and tired but smiling. For a moment time rewound. Back to birthdays and messy dinners when family was simple. Come in," Ruth said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope you're hungry." Clara kissed her cheek. "Always." "Oh, that smells incredible." Evan looked around, his voice softening. "You still keep everything the same. Why change what works?" Ruth said with a gentle shrug. They sat down, clinking glasses of lemonade. The candles flickered as conversation began. They talked about work, Clara's son, the rising price of gas, safe, surface things that didn't poke too deep. Ruth smiled through it all, proud, happy to just have them here. But the more they talked, the more Evan noticed the small details. The worn edges of the tablecloth, the dim light bulb above the counter, the faint draft slipping through a cracked windowpane. His mother had always been frugal, but this was different. This was stretched. He pushed the thought away. Tonight was supposed to be easy. After dinner, Clara insisted on helping with the dishes. "You cooked, Mom. I'll clean." Ruth tried to protest, but Clara waved her off, smiling. "Go sit. Let me do something for once." Ruth chuckled and stepped into the living room, humming as she straightened the couch pillows. The laughter from the kitchen made her heart swell. It felt like old times, until the laughter stopped. Clara had opened a drawer, looking for a towel, when her hand brushed against something crisp. She pulled it out, a folded envelope with a familiar blue logo of the local bank. Her eyes lingered on the name, Ruth Harper. Curiosity nudged her. She shouldn't look. But what harm could it do? She unfolded it. The paper trembled slightly in her hand as her eyes fell on the number printed at the bottom. Balance. $83.42. Her breath caught. "What?" Evan entered, drying his hands. "What's wrong?" Clara didn't answer at first. She looked up at him, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "Evan, look." He took the paper. Silence spread between them like spilled water. His jaw tightened, confusion flashing into disbelief. "This can't be right. She's been living on this." Ruth's voice floated in from the other room. "You two doing okay in there?" Clara's throat closed. She hastily folded the letter and slid it onto the counter, but it was too late. Ruth had seen the look on their faces as she walked in. "What is it?" Ruth asked, drying her hands on her apron. Evan hesitated, then placed the envelope on the table between them. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" Ruth's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to her children. She smiled faintly, though her hands trembled. "Because it's not your problem. Not our." Clara's voice cracked. "Mom, that's not even enough for groceries." "I manage," Ruth said softly. Evan's tone sharpened. "This isn't managing. You're scraping by." Ruth's smile faltered. "I'm fine, Evan." "No, you're not," Clara whispered. "Why didn't you ask us? We could have helped." Ruth looked down, her lips pressing together. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the low hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then Ruth said quietly, "I never asked you for money. And I never will." The words hung heavy in the air. Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "It's not about asking, Mom. It's about being honest." "I am honest," Ruth said, her voice trembling now. "I just didn't think you needed to know every detail of my life." Clara's eyes filled. "You raised us, you gave us everything, and now you're, what, pretending you're okay so we won't feel bad?" Ruth looked at her daughter, tears glimmering but not falling. "Clara, I've lived a good life. Have a roof, food, peace. You have families to raise. I don't want to be anyone's burden." Evan's anger cracked into guilt. "You're not a burden," he said softer now. "You're our mother." Ruth reached out, touching his arm gently. "And that's why I'll never ask." The moment broke him. He looked away, swallowing hard, as if emotion were a weakness he couldn't show. Clara, still trembling, wiped her eyes. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she whispered. Ruth smiled faintly. "I'm not alone. I have my children. And tonight, that's enough." But as she spoke, something fragile settled over the room, like dust on forgotten glass. They all knew those words didn't erase the truth they'd seen. Later, after the dishes were done and goodbyes were said, Ruth stood by the door watching them drive away. The taillights disappeared down the street, leaving her porch bathed in quiet again. She closed the door slowly, leaning against it for a moment. The house felt heavier now, the silence thicker. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, smaller somehow. From the car, Clara kept glancing in the rearview mirror. "Did you see her face?" she whispered. "She's ashamed." Evan stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." "She's too proud, Evan." "I know." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "So was Dad." Clara bit her lip, looking down. "Maybe that's where we get it from." The car turned the corner, headlights cutting through the night. Behind them, Ruth switched off the lights one by one, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left. When someone you love hides their struggles to protect you, is it love or fear? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe pride can sometimes look like love? That night, Ruth sat at her table long after the candles had melted down to wax puddles. The bank envelope lay unfolded beside her cup of cold tea. She traced the faded numbers with her finger. For the first time, she felt the weight of the truth her children had seen, and the loneliness of a secret no longer hers to carry. In the stillness, she whispered, "I never asked them for money, but maybe I should have asked them to stay." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a neighboring house. Families together, unbroken. Ruth smiled through her tears. "They'll come around," she told herself softly. "They always do." But she didn't know that the silence between them had only just begun. 3 days passed. No calls, no messages, just silence, a thick, invisible wall between Ruth and her children. The house felt colder without their voices. The teacups remained unwashed on the counter, as if waiting for a conversation that never finished. Ruth kept herself busy, sweeping, folding, cooking for one. But everything she did carried an ache now, a quiet echo of the question that wouldn't leave her alone. Had she done something wrong? When the phone finally rang, she snatched it up so quickly her hands shook. "Mom," Evan said, his tone clipped. "How are you?" "Fine," she answered quickly. "I've been keeping busy." He paused. "About the other night." Ruth's stomach tightened. "Oh, Evan, don't trouble yourself with that. It's all forgotten." "It's not forgotten, Mom." She heard papers shuffling on his end, voices in the background. He was working even while talking. "You shouldn't have to live like that," he said. "I'm not living like that." Her voice sharpened. "I'm living just fine. I've always managed." Evan exhaled hard. "You don't have to manage anymore. Clara and I can." "Evan," she cut in firmly. "I said I'm fine." There was silence. Then quietly, "Why do you always do this?" She frowned. "Do what?" "Push everyone away the second they try to help." Ruth's eyes burned. "Because I raised two strong, capable adults who shouldn't have to worry about their mother's grocery list, that's why." Before he could reply, she said gently, "I love you, sweetheart," and ended the call. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. Pride and pain twisted together until she couldn't tell which one hurt more. Across town, Clara was pacing her living room, her toddler playing quietly with blocks nearby. Evan's voice came through the phone, low and frustrated. "She won't hear a word of it." "I knew she'd react that way," Clara said. "You can't just call and corner her. She's living on $80, Clara. What am I supposed to do? Ignore that?" "No," she said softly. "But you can't force her either. You know how she is." Evan rubbed his temple. "We need a plan." Clara sat down, staring at her son on the floor. "A plan for what?" "To help her, even if she won't let us." There was a long pause. "Do you hear how crazy that sounds?" Clara whispered. "She'll see it as pity." Evan's tone hardened. "Then she'll have to be angry at me. I'd rather she hate me than go hungry." Clara didn't argue. But later, after hanging up, she whispered to herself, "You can't save someone who thinks needing help means failing." Ruth went about her week in routine silence. She cooked smaller portions. She skipped her heart medication one morning when she realized the refill cost had gone up. Every night, she told herself the same thing. They're busy. They have lives. And yet, a quiet fear had begun to grow inside her. Fear of her own body slowing down, of the bills piling up, of the loneliness that seemed heavier now that the truth was out. When she finally ventured out to the grocery store, she noticed how carefully she counted each coin. The cashier, a kind young man, smiled at her. "Rough week, Mrs. Harper." She smiled back weakly. "Just a long one." Her wallet felt too light, her pride too heavy. Meanwhile, Evan sat in his office late one night, staring at the ceiling after everyone else had gone home. A photo of Ruth and him on his graduation day sat on his desk. She was younger then, proud, radiant. He remembered what she'd said that day. "You did it, Evan. Your father would have been proud." He hadn't thought about it much then. But now, years later, he wondered if she'd gone without something to pay for his textbooks, for his apartment, for that suit he'd worn under his gown. He reached for his phone, typing out a message. "Mom, can I come by tomorrow? Just to check on you." He stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Clara, on the other hand, couldn't shake the guilt. She kept seeing that number, $83.42, flashing behind her eyelids. That night, after tucking her son into bed, she opened her laptop and began searching for small online jobs her mother could do from home. Crafting, baking, tutoring. Anything that might let Ruth keep her pride while easing her burden. When she called Evan the next morning, he was blunt. "You think Mom's gonna take some online job? She'll laugh in your face." "I know," Clara admitted. But I can't just sit here. Neither can I. Their frustration simmered quietly, feeding the tension between them. That weekend, Ruth sat on her porch again, knitting a scarf she didn't really need. The late afternoon sun made her eyes ache. She missed her children, even though they were only a few miles away. When Clara finally appeared at the gate, Ruth's heart leapt. "Clara," she said, smiling. "What a surprise." Clara walked up, holding a grocery bag. "I just thought you might need some company." Ruth's eyes softened. "You didn't have to bring anything." "It's just a few things," Clara said quickly, setting the bag down. "Milk, eggs, a loaf of bread, a few apples." Ruth stared at it for a long time. "I told you I didn't need help." "I know," Clara said gently. "It's not help. It's a visit." They stood in silence. The air between them was thick with all the things neither dared to say. Finally, Ruth smiled faintly and said, "You've got your father's stubbornness." Clara smiled back. "And your heart, I hope." But as she left that evening, Ruth quietly took half the groceries and slipped them into a bag. The next morning, she left them on Clara's porch with a note. "I can't take what I don't need. Buy something sweet for my grandson. Love, Mom." Have you ever loved someone so proud that helping them felt like hurting them? What would you have done if you were Evan or Clara? Comment your thoughts below. That night, Evan stopped by Clara's house, furious. She returned the food. Clara nodded, holding up the note. "She's making it impossible," he said, pacing. "She's scared," Clara whispered. "Of what?" "Us. Of needing us," she said quietly. "Of being seen as weak." Evan sank into a chair, head in his hands. "We're losing her, Clara. Not because she's sick, but because she's proud." Neither of them knew that at that same moment back at home, Ruth was sitting in her living room, looking at a framed photo of her family, whispering, "I hope they know I never wanted to make them feel small." Her voice trembled. "I just wanted them to see that I could still stand." The clock ticked softly, and outside, the wind rattled the window panes like a quiet warning. Pride can hold a house upright, but it can also make it awfully lonely. Sunday mornings had always been Ruth's favorite. Slow, soft, and filled with the smell of coffee and open windows. But that Sunday, the world tilted slightly out of rhythm. She woke dizzy. The edges of the room spun like a carousel. Her hands trembled as she reached for the counter, gripping it to steady herself. "Just low sugar," she murmured, trying to smile through the fog clouding her head. She tried to make tea, but her hands slipped. The cups shattered on the floor, scattering porcelain across the linoleum. She sank into the nearest chair, breathing hard. The world dimmed for a moment. When she opened her eyes again, she was in a white room, the sound of machines beeping softly beside her. "Mrs. Harper. You're awake." A nurse smiled gently, adjusting a monitor. Ruth blinked, disoriented. "Where am I?" "St. Mary's Hospital," the nurse said kindly. "You fainted at the grocery store. Someone called an ambulance." Ruth groaned softly. "Oh heavens! I must have scared people." The nurse chuckled. "A bit, yes. But you're okay now. Just exhausted and dehydrated. You need rest, and a bit of help at home." Ruth frowned, instantly alert. "Help? Oh no, I manage fine." The nurse exchanged a knowing look with the doctor who'd just entered. "Of course you do," the doctor said with a smile that didn't argue. "But let's keep you here overnight, just to be safe." Ruth sighed, sinking back into the pillow. "All right. But please don't call my children. They'll only worry." The nurse nodded, but by that afternoon, Evan and Clara were standing at her bedside. Evan's voice trembled despite his effort to sound calm. "Why didn't you tell us, Mom?" Ruth groaned softly. "Because there was nothing to tell. I just got a little light-headed." Clara leaned forward, her hands gripping the bedrail. "You collapsed in a store, Mom. That's not a little light-headed." "I'm fine," Ruth insisted. "You're both overreacting." Evan's jaw flexed. "You keep saying that. But it's not true." Ruth turned her face toward the window, watching the gray clouds roll past. I'm just tired. I'll be home tomorrow. Not alone, Clara said firmly. You're staying with me for a few days. I will not, Ruth snapped. I don't need babysitting. Mom. No, Ruth said more softly this time. I need my space. My home. That's where I heal best. Evan crossed his arms, frustration simmering under his calm facade. You can barely stand up without getting dizzy, but sure, let's pretend everything's fine. Watch your tone, Ruth warned. He exhaled, stepping back. Clara squeezed his arm. Let's not fight here. The doctor interrupted gently. Mrs. Harper, I'd recommend someone stay with you at least for a week. Ruth shot him a look. I see you've joined their side. He smiled politely. Just doing my job. That night, after the doctor left, silence filled the room. Ruth pretended to sleep, but her children's voices drifted in whispers from the hallway. Evan. She's not safe alone. Clara. I'll stay with her. You've got work. Evan. You can't do it alone, Clara. Clara sighed. Then we'll both stay. We'll take turns. Ruth felt a tear slide down her cheek as she lay still. Pride had built walls around her heart, but their concern chipped at every brick. The next morning, the doctor discharged her, with firm instructions for rest. When Evan came to collect her things, Ruth sat in silence, watching him pack. He folded her shawl carefully, then glanced at her. You know, Mom, I don't think we've spent more than an hour together in months. She smiled faintly. We've all been busy. Too busy to notice when you're falling apart. Her smile faded. Don't make this dramatic, Evan. He zipped her bag without another word. By the time they reached Clara's house, Ruth had given up arguing. The front door opened to the smell of cinnamon and the chaos of a toddler running in circles. Grandma! The little boy squealed, throwing himself into her lap. Ruth laughed, her heart instantly lighter. Well, hello there, my handsome boy. Clara smiled softly. You can take my room, Mom. I'll sleep on the couch. Don't be ridiculous, Ruth protested. It's already done, Clara said firmly. For a few moments the tension thawed. The sight of her grandson playing eased Ruth's restlessness. But when Evan left that evening, the silence returned. Different this time. He hesitated at the door. I'll check in tomorrow, he said. Ruth nodded. Drive safe, dear. After he left, Clara sat beside her on the couch. You know, you don't have to prove anything to us. Ruth smiled tiredly. I'm not proving anything. I'm just living how I always have. Clara took her hand. Maybe it's time to live differently. Ruth didn't answer. The truth was too heavy to carry into words. Days passed. Ruth tried to insist she could handle chores, but Clara wouldn't allow it. Evan visited every evening after work, bringing groceries and quiet guilt. The house was filled with sound again. Baby laughter, dinner sizzling, the creak of floors under familiar footsteps. Yet beneath it all, there lingered a fragile discomfort, a tension born from love that didn't know how to show itself properly. One evening, Ruth sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Evan joined her, handing her a mug of warm tea. You know, he said softly, when I was little, you used to walk me to school every morning no matter the weather. He chuckled. Of course. You hated mornings. I hated leaving you, he admitted quietly. Ruth blinked, surprised. You never said that. He smiled faintly. Guess I got your habit of keeping things in. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. Just heavy with things finally being felt. Inside, Clara watched them through the window, tears brimming. For the first time, it felt like a door was opening between them. Not wide, but enough for light to slip through. Later that night, Ruth lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Pride still tugged at her heart, whispering that she didn't belong here, that she'd lost control of her own life. But beneath that, another voice whispered softer. Maybe love isn't about control at all. Maybe it's about being seen, even when it's uncomfortable. She turned over, letting that thought settle into the quiet. For the first time in years, she slept through the night without waking to the sound of her own loneliness. The morning sunlight spilled through Clara's kitchen window, brushing Ruth's silver hair with gold. She sat quietly at the table, stirring her tea long after the sugar had dissolved. Evan had gone to work. Clara was folding laundry in the next room. It should have felt peaceful, but inside Ruth felt the slow ache of being watched, cared for, protected. It was a strange comfort, like walking on legs that had forgotten how to stand without wobbling. Her eyes drifted to the family photo pinned to the refrigerator. Her late husband, Harold, smiled back at her. His arm wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm trying," she whispered to him. "I really am." Clara walked in quietly. "Talking to Dad again." Ruth smiled faintly. "He's still a better listener than most." Clara chuckled and sat beside her. "He always said you'd out-stubborn him." "Did I?" Ruth asked softly. Clara hesitated. "In the best way." They sat in silence for a long moment before Ruth's eyes dropped to her mug. "You know, when your father passed, I promised myself I wouldn't be a burden to you too." Clara's hands froze on the laundry. Ruth continued, her voice gentle but tired. "He was sick for almost 2 years. I watched the bills pile up, the savings vanish, little by little. After he was gone, I made up my mind. No matter what happened, I'd never ask for help again." Clara looked at her mother with wide, tearful eyes. "Mom, you were alone. You didn't have to be." Ruth smiled faintly. "I did what I thought was right. I worked extra shifts, took in sewing jobs. And when that wasn't enough, I started selling his tools, little by little. It hurt, but it was ours. I wasn't going to let anyone else pay for my life." Clara reached across the table and took her hand. "That's not living, Mom. That's surviving." Ruth's eyes glistened. "Sometimes surviving is living, dear." That afternoon, Evan stopped by early. Clara was at the store, leaving him and Ruth alone. He found her sitting in the living room, flipping through an old album. He sat beside her, glancing down. "Is that Dad's fishing trip?" he asked softly. Ruth smiled. "The one where you fell into the lake?" Evan laughed, shaking his head. "I was 10. I thought I could catch a fish with my hands." "You were so sure of yourself," Ruth said fondly. "You always were." He watched her fingers trace a picture, one of Harold holding baby Clara, his face sunburnt and beaming. "He worked so hard," Evan murmured. "He did," Ruth said. "And when he got sick, I thought I could handle it alone. He wanted to use the insurance early, but I refused. I told him I'd take care of things." Evan's brows furrowed. "Why?" Ruth turned the page. "Because I wanted him to go in peace, not thinking he'd left me helpless." Evan looked at her, a mixture of admiration and heartbreak in his eyes. "You've been carrying everything by yourself since then." She smiled sadly. "It's what mothers do." "No," he said quietly. "It's what you do." That evening, after dinner, Clara found Evan sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the fading sky. "What's wrong?" she asked. He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She sold Dad's tools to pay bills. Worked herself half to death. And we never noticed." Clara sat beside him. "We were kids. She didn't want us to notice." "I know, but..." He shook his head. "All this time I thought she was fine. I thought if she needed us, she'd call." Clara's voice softened. "She thought loving us meant never letting us see her struggle." Evan swallowed hard. "And I thought loving her meant staying out of her way." For a long while, they sat in silence, watching the stars bloom one by one. Clara finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder if we inherited her pride?" Evan laughed quietly. "Every day." Inside, Ruth sat at the kitchen table, listening to the faint hum of their voices through the open window. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew the rhythm of their concern. She looked at the photograph of Harold again. "They're good kids," she whispered. "Better than I deserve." She opened a small drawer near the table and pulled out a folded envelope, old, soft at the edges. She stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. The next morning, Clara found the envelope on the table. Inside was a note written in Ruth's neat, looping script. To my children. If you ever wondered why I never asked for help, it's because I never stopped believing in you. You were my proof that I'd done something right. I didn't need money when I had you. But I see now, love doesn't keep score. Shares the load. Thank you for not giving up on me. Mom. Clara pressed the note to her chest, tears spilling freely. When she looked up, Evan was standing at the door, his face pale and wet. She finally said it, he whispered. Clara nodded. Yeah. And she finally let us see her. That afternoon, Ruth walked into the kitchen and found both her children cooking together, bickering about seasoning, laughing like they used to. She stood quietly, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. When they noticed her, Clara wiped her hands on a towel. Come sit, Mom. We're making your favorite beef stew. Ruth smiled. It smells divine. Evan grinned. We found your old recipe card. Thought it was time to steal your magic. She chuckled, easing into a chair. I see my legacy is safe then. As they cooked, the air filled with warmth, onion and garlic and laughter. The kind of night that healed invisible wounds without anyone saying the words. Ruth looked at her children, grown, flawed, beautiful, and thought maybe I wasn't wrong to be strong. Maybe I was just strong in the wrong way. For the first time in weeks, laughter filled Clara's kitchen. The air smelled like simmering beef stew and warm bread. Evan stood by the stove in an apron that read, World's Okayest Cook. Ruth couldn't stop laughing every time she looked at it. Mom, Evan protested, pretending to glare. Don't laugh at the chef. I'm not laughing, she said, still chuckling. I'm admiring your culinary bravery. Clara leaned against the counter, smiling. This might be the first time he's ever used a pan that wasn't for takeout. Evan rolled his eyes. Oh, haha. The teasing, the warmth, the clinking of utensils. It was like slipping back into a time they'd all forgotten. A time before pride, before distance, before money ever mattered. For a while, no one mentioned the past. They just cooked, talked, and filled the house with a rare, living kind of joy. After dinner, Ruth sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs, watching fireflies dance in the dark. Clara joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. Remember when you used to catch fireflies with us? Clara said softly. Ruth smiled. Of course. You always let them go too soon. I didn't like the jar, Clara admitted. I didn't like seeing something beautiful trapped. Ruth looked at her daughter, realizing she was talking about more than insects. I suppose I did that to myself, didn't I? She said quietly. Clara reached for her hand. Maybe. But you're out of the jar now. They both laughed gently, the kind of laugh that trembles at the edge of tears. The next morning, Evan arrived early with coffee and muffins. Clara was already up, helping her son build a tower of wooden blocks in the living room. Ruth watched them from her chair, a tender ache spreading through her chest. Good morning, sunshine, Evan said, kissing her forehead as he handed her a cup. Ruth took it with a smile. You're spoiling me. It's about time, he replied. We owe you about 30 years of breakfast. She laughed, shaking her head. You owe me nothing, Evan. Seeing you two together like this. That's worth everything. Evan leaned against the doorway. You know, Mom, when I saw your bank statement that day, I felt so angry at myself. I kept thinking, how could I not know? How could I let you carry all that alone? Ruth looked down at her cup. Because I didn't let you. He blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of her honesty. She went on. I thought protecting you meant keeping my struggles quiet. But I see now it only made you feel shut out. Evan sat beside her, his voice softer now. I used to think money was proof of success. But that night, looking at that number, I realized how much I'd failed where it mattered most. Ruth touched his arm. You haven't failed, Evan. You became a good man. That's all I ever wanted. He swallowed hard. Maybe being a good man means learning when to stop pretending we're fine. Her eyes glistened. Maybe it does. Later that afternoon, Clara took Ruth for a short walk in the park nearby. The trees were starting to turn, crisp leaves painting the path in gold and red. "Mom," Clara said as they walked slowly, "do you ever think about moving in with me? Not because you need to, but because maybe it'd be nice." Ruth smiled. "You'd regret that after 2 weeks." "I don't think I would," Clara said quietly. "You'd have company, help, a warm meal every night. And you'd get to see your grandson every morning." Ruth's eyes softened. "You'd really want me around all that time?" "Mom," Clara said, voice trembling, "I need you around." Ruth stopped walking. She looked at her daughter, really looked, seeing the grown woman and the little girl in her at the same time. All those years she'd spent trying to spare her children from worry. She hadn't realized that being needed wasn't a burden. It was love. "I'll think about it," Ruth said with a smile. "That's all I wanted," Clara replied, smiling through tears. That night, after dinner, Evan brought out an old box of photo albums. "We should make a scrapbook," he suggested. "For your birthday next month." Ruth's eyes lit up. "You still remember my birthday?" Evan grinned. "We're working on redeeming ourselves." Clara laughed. "We'll make a deal, you pick the photos, we'll do the work." As they sat together, flipping through decades of pictures, birthdays, camping trips, messy kitchens, and laughter, the years between them seemed to dissolve. They found one photo of Harold, caught mid-laugh, his hand reaching toward the camera. Ruth traced the image with her fingertips. "He had that same look when you kids were born," she said softly. "Pure joy. Like the world had just given him a second chance." Evan smiled. "You both gave us that, Mom." "No," Ruth whispered. "You gave me that." As the evening stretched on, the three of them dozed off in the living room. Clara's head rested on her mother's shoulder. Evan snored softly from the couch. The television flickered with a quiet glow. Ruth sat there for a long time listening to their breathing. Her heart swelled with gratitude, a gentle warmth that replaced the cold emptiness she'd lived with for years. She thought about the word family, how it wasn't just blood or obligation. It was persistence. It was the willingness to stay when things got messy, to reach across silence, to say, "I still see you." Have you ever realized too late how someone's pride was really just their pain in disguise? What would you say to them if you had the chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. Later, as the house grew quiet, Ruth whispered into the dimness, "Thank you, Harold, for giving me them." She closed her eyes, listening to the hum of life around her, a child's laughter still echoing faintly from the hallway, the ticking clock, the soft rise and fall of her children's breathing. It was a symphony of belonging. And for the first time, Ruth didn't feel like a burden. She felt like the center of a circle finally made whole. It had been 2 peaceful weeks since Ruth's collapse. The quiet, fragile happiness in Clara's home felt almost like healing. But healing has a way of testing itself. It started with an envelope. Evan brought it one afternoon, a thick stack of papers tucked neatly inside. He set it down on the kitchen table with an unreadable expression. "What's that?" Ruth asked, setting down her teacup. "Just something we wanted to talk to you about," Evan said. Clara glanced at him nervously. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "What kind of something?" Evan took a deep breath. "Clara and I spoke to the bank. We pooled some money together just to help stabilize things. It's not a handout, Mom. It's an account we'll both contribute to each month. For bills, groceries, emergencies, anything you need." The room went very still. Clara tried to fill the silence. "Mom, please don't be upset. It's not charity, it's love. You wouldn't let us give you money, so we thought this was a compromise." Ruth stared at the envelope like it was something poisonous. Her heartbeat quickened. "You went to the bank. You spoke to them about my account." Evan nodded cautiously. "We wanted to make sure you're safe, that you don't have to worry." "Safe?" Ruth's voice cracked, low and trembling. "Do you think I've survived 70 years because I needed you to make me safe?" Clara reached for her hand. Mom, we didn't mean. Ruth jerked her hand back. You went behind my back. You took my dignity and turned it into a project. The words hit hard. Clara's eyes filled with tears. We were trying to help. Ruth stood slowly, her hands trembling. Help, she said, voice breaking. You call that help? You didn't ask. You just decided for me, like I'm some child who can't count her own pennies. Evan tried to reason with her. Mom, please. We're not saying you can't take care of yourself. We're saying you shouldn't have to alone. But Ruth's pride had been pierced deeper than she could admit. You've taken everything I fought to keep. My independence, my privacy, my respect. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be pitied by your own children? Evan's jaw tightened. It's not pity, Mom, it's love. No, Ruth whispered, tears spilling now. It's guilt. You feel guilty for not seeing me sooner. And now you want to fix it with money. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Clara's lip quivered. That's not fair, Mom. Ruth looked at her daughter with eyes full of old hurt. Fair? You think any of this has been fair? Watching your children grow up so fast they forget to look back. Clara stood up suddenly, voice trembling. We didn't forget you. You just stopped letting us in. Evan slammed his hand on the table. Enough. They all froze. He took a shaky breath. This isn't about pride anymore, Mom. This is about survival. You fainted in a store. You were skipping meals. What if next time no one's there to catch you? Ruth's voice came out softer now, but it trembled with exhaustion. Then that will be my choice. My life has been mine to live, and it will be mine to end with dignity. Evan stared at her as though she'd struck him. Clara covered her mouth, tears flowing freely. Don't talk like that, Evan said hoarsely. Please. Ruth sank back into her chair. I'm tired, Evan. I spent my life fighting to stand tall, even when I was breaking inside. I can't lose that now, not even for love. That night, the house felt colder than it had in months. No one spoke during dinner. Even the child's laughter seemed to know better than to interrupt the storm lingering in the air. When Ruth went to bed, Clara stood by her door for a long time, clutching the envelope. Finally, she slipped it under her mother's pillow. No words, just hope that one day Ruth would understand it for what it was. Love, not control. The next morning the bed was empty. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She rushed to the kitchen, no Ruth. The porch empty. Panic surged. Evan, she yelled, her voice shaking. He came running down the hall, half-dressed, eyes wide. She's gone, Clara said. Her coat's missing. Evan grabbed his keys. I'll check her house. 15 tense minutes later, he found Ruth sitting quietly on her porch steps, dressed in her old cardigan, staring at the morning sky. Mom, he said breathlessly, running up to her. You scared us half to death. Ruth looked up, calm but weary. I just wanted to sit where my life still feels like mine. Evan knelt beside her. You could have told us. I didn't want another argument, she said softly. I needed to remember who I was before all this, before hospitals and accounts and pity. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, You think needing help makes you less of who you are. But you're wrong. Just means you've done your part. It's our turn now. Ruth turned away. It's not that simple. Maybe not, Evan said. But love never is. Back at Clara's house, the silence between them stretched through the day. Ruth barely spoke. Clara cooked, cleaned, and tried to hold herself together. When she finally walked into the living room that evening, she found her mother quietly folding the baby's clothes. Mom, Clara whispered. I'm sorry. We should have asked. We should have trusted you. Ruth didn't look up. I know you meant well. Clara hesitated. You always taught us that love meant standing on our own 2 feet. Maybe we took that lesson too far. Ruth's hands paused mid-fold. Maybe I taught it wrong. They locked eyes, both realizing how much they had misunderstood each other for years. Ruth reached across and took her daughter's trembling hand. "I'm sorry too, sweetheart. I just didn't know how to let you love me." That night, Evan returned and found them sitting together in the quiet glow of the living room lamp. The tension had softened into something sad but tender, a love that had survived its breaking point. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Sometimes the hardest part of love is letting it change you. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. The rain that had threatened all night finally arrived, tapping gently on the roof, the soft rhythm echoing through Clara's house. Ruth sat by the window, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring at the rivulets of water streaking the glass. The world outside blurred and shimmered like a memory half forgotten. Evan came in carrying coffee, his expression careful, uncertain. Clara followed a few steps behind, watching her mother's silhouette in the gray light. No one spoke for a long time. The air felt heavy with all that had been said, and all that hadn't. Finally, Ruth broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began softly, her voice raspy with emotion, "about everything. About pride. About love. About what it means to let go." Evan and Clara exchanged a glance, waiting. Ruth continued, "When your father died, I promised myself I'd never be a burden to you. It was my way of surviving. I thought if I stayed strong, if I never asked for anything, I'd spare you the pain of worrying about me." She swallowed hard. "But maybe I didn't spare you at all. Maybe I just shut you out." Her words trembled, fragile and honest. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't shut us out, Mom. We just," she faltered, her voice breaking. "We didn't try hard enough to push the door open." Evan set down his coffee and knelt by his mother's chair. "You taught us to stand tall, to work hard, to never complain. We took that lesson so literally we forgot that you might need someone to lean on too." Ruth reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. "I'm sorry I made it so hard to love me." He shook his head. "You didn't. We just forgot how to listen." For a moment, the three of them sat together in silence, the sound of rain filling the spaces where anger and misunderstanding had lived. Then Ruth took a deep breath. "I saw the account you made for me." Clara's face went pale. "Mom." Ruth held up her hand gently. "Let me finish." She turned to look at both of them. "At first I was furious. I thought you'd taken something from me. But now I see it differently. You weren't taking control. You were trying to give me comfort. You were trying to give back what I gave you." Evan exhaled shakily. "We just didn't want you to worry anymore." Ruth smiled faintly. "Worrying is what mothers do best. But I understand now. It's time to let you do some of that worrying too." The rain picked up, a steady drumbeat against the windows. Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to Evan. He unfolded it carefully and froze. It was a check. For a large sum. "Mom, what is this?" "It's my savings," Ruth said simply. "I've been saving little by little for years. I wanted to leave you something someday. But I realized, what's the point of saving for someday when we need each other today?" Clara covered her mouth, stunned. "You mean?" Ruth smiled. "We'll put it in the family account. But it won't be for me. It'll be for us. A shared account, our safety net, our way of saying we take care of each other now." Evan's voice wavered. "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to," Ruth interrupted, firm but tender. "Because love isn't pride and it isn't debt. It's giving when you can, and letting others give when you can't." Her voice softened. "That's the choice I'm making. To let love lead, not fear." That afternoon, the three of them drove to the bank together. The rain had eased, leaving the streets glistening and clean. Inside, the banker greeted them with polite curiosity as Ruth handed over her papers. Clara stood close, Evan beside her, both silent as their mother calmly filled out the forms. When it was done, Ruth smiled at the banker and said, "It's not about money. It's about connection." The banker, slightly puzzled, simply nodded. But Evan and Clara understood. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Clara slipped her arm around her mother's shoulders. "You did it, Mom." Ruth chuckled. "I suppose we all did." That evening, they sat around Clara's dining table. Same place where the confrontation had begun weeks earlier. This time the air was lighter. There was laughter between the pauses, warmth in the quiet. Ruth looked at her children, their grown faces, their kind eyes, the life she had once dreamed they'd build, and felt something inside her finally unclench. "I was so afraid of being forgotten," she said softly. "But I see now. Love doesn't fade with distance. It just waits until you're ready to let it back in." Evan lifted his glass. "To Mom. For teaching us that strength isn't silence." Clara added, "And that love doesn't always look like what we expect." They clinked glasses, laughter and tears blending together like the perfect melody of forgiveness. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, Ruth stepped out onto the porch one last time. The moonlight shimmered across the damp lawn, and a cool breeze brushed her face. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet, "We're going to be okay, John. They're good kids. They just needed to find their way back." Then she smiled, softly, peacefully, because she finally believed it. Have you ever held on to pride so tightly that it almost cost you love? What made you finally choose to let go? Share your story in the comments, someone might need to hear it. Spring had arrived quietly, painting the world in soft greens and golds. 3 months had passed since Ruth's fainting spell. 3 months that had reshaped the rhythm of their family. The air in Clara's home was lighter now, and even the silences between them felt full rather than empty. On this bright Saturday morning, Ruth was back in her own house, her modest kitchen smelling faintly of cinnamon and coffee. The windows were open, letting in a warm breeze that fluttered the curtains. There were flowers on the table, fresh tulips from Evan as he did every weekend now. Life was simple again. But not the same kind of simple as before. This was a simple built on connection, not solitude. Clara arrived first, carrying a bag of groceries. She didn't ask whether Ruth needed them. She just placed them on the counter like a daughter reclaiming a small ritual of care. "Morning, Mom," she said, kissing Ruth's cheek. Ruth smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. You're early." "I brought strawberries," Clara said, unpacking the bag. "You said you wanted to make pie." Ruth chuckled. "Oh, so now it's our pie, is it?" Clara grinned. "It's a family recipe, isn't it?" They shared a laugh. An easy, unguarded laugh that filled the kitchen with warmth. Moments later, Evan walked in carrying a folded newspaper and his little niece, who squealed at the smell of baking. "Grandma's making magic again," he announced. Ruth rolled her eyes affectionately. "You just want first dibs on the crust edges." "Guilty," Evan said, setting the child down and slipping an arm around his mother's shoulders. "It smells like home in here." They moved around the kitchen together like a symphony. Ruth stirring filling, Clara kneading dough, Evan slicing fruit, the little girl humming softly as she played with measuring spoons. There was no grand gesture, no loud revelation. Just the quiet, powerful piece of love that had learned to bend instead of break. Ruth watched them both, her chest swelling with something that felt like gratitude and forgiveness all at once. "You know," she said softly, "for years I thought love meant doing everything on my own. But I was wrong. Love means letting people walk beside you, even when your steps falter." Evan smiled. "You're still teaching us, Mom." Clara nodded. "Every day." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face them. "And you're teaching me too. That letting go doesn't mean giving up. It just means trusting someone else to hold you steady." They all went quiet for a moment, and it wasn't an awkward quiet. It was reverence, the kind that lives only in the space after healing. When the pie came out of the oven, the smell drew neighbors from across the fence. Ruth insisted on cutting the first slice for each of them. Her hands steady, her eyes bright. Evan watched her closely, seeing for the first time not the woman who needed protecting, but the woman who had built the world beneath his feet. Later, when everyone was full and laughter had replaced the echoes of old fears, Ruth excused herself and stepped out onto her porch. She leaned against the railing, feeling the sun on her face. From inside, she could hear her children's voices. Familiar, comforting, alive. She took a deep breath, then opened her small notebook, the one where she used to balance her checkbook. Inside, she had written something new across the last page. My balance is not measured in dollars anymore. It's measured in love, in laughter, in second chances. She smiled, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. Later that evening, Evan joined her on the porch. He sat quietly beside her, both of them watching the sunset melt into shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever miss Dad?" he asked softly. Ruth smiled wistfully. "Every day. But lately I feel him here. In the laughter. In the peace." Evan nodded, blinking back tears. "He'd be proud of you, Mom." Ruth turned to him with a knowing smile. "He'd be proud of us. All of us." After a long pause, she added, "You know what the funny thing is? I thought your father was the one teaching you how to take care of others. But it turns out you learned that from me too." Evan laughed gently. "We did. You just forgot to let us return the favor." Ruth reached out and took his hand, their fingers fitting together with quiet understanding. "Well," she said softly, "I finally remembered." As dusk deepened, Clara joined them with 2 cups of tea. She sat on the porch steps, her head resting on her mother's knee like she used to when she was small. "Mom," she said after a while, "I've been thinking about starting something. A family savings plan, not just for emergencies but for experiences. For moments that matter." Ruth smiled warmly. "What kind of moments?" Clara looked up at her. "Vacations. Birthdays. Maybe just dinners like this. We've all spent too long saving for security. I want to start saving for joy." Ruth's heart swelled. "I'd like that." "Then it's settled," Clara said, her smile bright. "Our first deposit, this pie." Ruth laughed, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's a good investment, sweetheart." The next morning, Ruth woke early, sunlight filtering through her curtains. The birds outside were singing, the air crisp and new. She made her tea as she always did, but this time there was an extra cup on the counter, just in case one of her children dropped by. She looked around her home, small, modest, full of love, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular. Just to life, for giving her another chance to get it right. A week later, Evan and Clara organized a small family gathering at Ruth's home. The entire backyard buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the smell of grilled food. Children played tag on the lawn, and Ruth sat beneath a string of lights, her eyes reflecting every spark of joy around her. Evan raised a glass. "To Mom, for reminding us that love isn't measured in money, but in moments," Clara added, "and for proving that even the strongest hearts can learn to let love back in." Everyone clinked glasses, and Ruth just smiled, softly, proudly at peace. When the night grew quiet and everyone had gone home, Ruth sat on her porch again. The moon hung full and bright above her. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out the small envelope that had started it all, the one with her old bank balance. She opened it slowly, her eyes tracing the faded numbers. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal with a note written across the front. "This was never what I was worth." And beside it, she wrote in steady, graceful handwriting, "My real balance is love." Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video, and I'm confident you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more exciting and heartwarming stories waiting for you. Just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.